All right, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Paul Bertler, and I'm your host for tonight. I'm a NOFA Massachusetts volunteer, as well as a board member, and you are attending the Keeping Sheep Organically with Kimberly Mastrianni. Before we get started, I have a few reminders to go over. We have a number of sponsors who help make our conference possible, and I encourage you to purchase from them whenever you can. And if you are able to purchase from them, please say, hey, I appreciate the fact that you support NOFA. We can't do this without our organizations that support us. Most importantly, I want to thank you, the viewers and listeners out there, especially our NOFA members, who make all of our education and advocacy work possible. So thanks so much for coming to our virtual summer conference. We are also presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on this map and honor those whose land you now occupy. If you're attending from outside the New England region, this map is interactive and is actually a global resource, and it can be accessed at native-land.ca. Very interesting, and I encourage you to take a look. If any of you are attending for continuing education credits or units, have your phone ready, and here is the code to scan in order to collect that credit. So I'll leave this up for 1 minute, and then I will also show this code at the end of the workshop in case you didn't get it now, or for those that will join later. With that, distinguished guests, I am very excited to introduce a longtime farmer and friend of NOFA, Kim Mastrianni.
Hi, thanks for joining us. This presentation is going to talk about raising sheep, handling sheep, and primarily staying with organic processes and procedures and practices. I've been raising sheep probably about, I want to say 15 years now in New Hampshire with my family. We started out a little bit more traditional, following the rules and trying to do everything right. And I'll tell you up front, I lost a bunch the first couple of years trying to go along the lines of standard practices. And that's one of the reasons that I got pushed, that I pushed myself towards more organic practices and looking at alternatives, because some of what I was doing just simply wasn't working for us here. And since then it has worked rather well. So we're heavily into it. My husband's been on the NOFA board for New Hampshire for a number of years, and I find, like I said, that it simply just works better for us. It works better for my animals, and it works better for our practices. So I'm going to walk through this. I'd like to hear from you guys, if any of you, before we get started, do you have sheep? Are you thinking about getting sheep? Are you looking to get certified organic, because we can focus a little more on that or not, depending on what everybody's preferences are. So how do we work this, Paul? I want to say, who else got sheep right now?
Yeah, we have a small group, so if you want to just unmute yourself and say a quick hello and your interest, you're welcome to do that. And feel free to click the unmute button, say your piece, and mute back up.
All right. So let's hear. There's not too many. Greg, you want to start?
Greg.
There you are.
There you go. I'm just sort of general interest. I wandered in off the street.
Oh, perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, Stephanie. Or Caden? Everybody's shy. Rachel?
Hi, yeah, I'm actually about to have some goats come live here, and I know it's not the same, but
It's
figured
close enough.
I'd
There's
listen
some
in and,
different.
listen because I've never raised animals before. So
Awesome. Okay, perfect.
thank you.
And there is a lot of similarities along the just management practices that cross over really easily. So,
Amazing.
Katie, how about you? That's okay. We'll just keep rolling and
Well,
go.
people might be
If
cooking
anybody's
dinner at
got
the
any
same
questions.
time.
A message came up when I was trying to, I didn't see where the mute button was, and a message came up finally that said press Alt A, and that would unmute me. So do people know that?
Press what, Greg?
Alt A.
Alt A gets you unmuted. Okay, Alt A gets you unmuted.
At least that's that's the message that came up, and it worked for me. Okay.
Okay. Usually there's also a little microphone button somewhere on your screen.
Down there in the lower left. There it is.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. And Caden said they have no microphone or camera, so there'll be a one-sided discussion for that way. So,
Not a problem. All right. Well, I'm going to go to the share screen and we'll get started. And if you have any questions, just pop in or comment, whatever.
Great.
Okay. Do you guys have the presentation? Paul, do
Not
you have
yet.
the presentation?
Nope.
Okay, we'll try again.
Here we go.
Got it?
Yes.
Okay, hold on a second. There we are. Right, should be good. Okay, so again, we're talking raising sheep organically, and we've already gone through this one. So USDA has basic structure around certification and operation, and so we're going to talk about getting started, the regulations, contacts, general rules, and then we'll spend some time talking about operations, actual handling, etc. National Organic Program, or the NOP, develops and implements and administers national production and labeling standards. They have, this is their website. All of this, this presentation will be available for everybody.
Okay, but I'm still like sleeping naked with no blanket.
Right.
Even though the AC is on. Wow.
No, the AC.
Is there a question? No, okay. So there's also a national list of allowed and prohibited substances, which identifies what can be used and what can't be used in organic production and handling. That covers a whole lot of bases, but there's always things maybe that pop up that aren't covered, and you can actually reach out to them and ask specifics. They're usually pretty helpful about trying to look something up or figure out if particular chemical or particular product can or can't be used. Your State Department of Agriculture is going to be your primary contact if you're looking for any kind of certification. There are fees to be paid. There are some grant monies and cost shares available to help cover some of this cost. If you're talking about a big producer that's transitioning a whole lot of fields or a whole lot of livestock, it can come in handy. If you're selling and your sales are under $5,000 a year, you don't require certification, but you do require compliance. So if you're going to a local farmer's market, for instance, and you're selling a small amount of product that you've raised organically and you want to say to people that it's organic, that's fine. You just need to be complying with the rules, but you don't necessarily have to be certified. So sales, again, per year under $5,000 doesn't require certification. Your State Department of Agriculture is responsible for the rules, the applications, the certification. Your local county extension office, if you're going to get animals, if you're thinking about having the goats, for instance, it's very helpful to go work with them. They have a lot of information there on facilities, on rotational grazing. They can help you with planning. There are some grants available for helping with certain fencing or water installations or things along those lines. There's a good bit of hoops to jump through if you're going to go for any of those, but they are there and they can come in handy. And that's through your local county extension office. So general rules, when you're talking about organic anything, when you're talking, it's not really even organic. Your livestock ought to be suitable to the location and the purpose. You want to think about your climate. You want to think about how much grass you have, disease resistance, anything along those lines. You don't want chickens or goats or cattle that are really suited for hot climates, equatorial regions, etc., and then put them up in New Hampshire where it's snowing 5 months out of the year. So those are things to kind of keep in mind when you're looking to select your animals. Also, you want to think about what exactly it is that you're looking to do. So if you're talking about raising meat animals strictly and you're not interested in any kind of wool or fiber product, then selecting for meat breeds saves you a lot of time and stress and extra work. So things like Dorpers or Katahdins that are meat breeds, they're hair sheep, and for when it comes to sheep, they're hair sheep. You could do the same when you're talking about goats. You're not worried about getting these guys shorn every year. You're not worried about trying to figure out what you're going to do with all that wool that ends up in your garage. If you're looking strictly dairy, there are breeds that have been selected over the years for best milk production, East Frisians, Lacones. These are all breeds that are specifically selected for milk production. If you're looking to do cheese, same thing again with goats. If you're talking about breeding, if you're looking to have dairy, then you're looking at dairy goats, not meat goats. Dual purpose gets you a little bit of everything. I raise Leicester long wools. I've got a few crossbreds as well. I love the fiber. I have a small fiber business that, you know, we hit a lot of the fiber shows, or we did until COVID, hit a lot of the fiber shows. So that's part of the reason I selected that particular breed. I just really love what they produce, and I find the sheep to be also really useful. There's lots of breeds that are specifically targeted for fiber. Most of them are dual purpose, which means you're looking at potential meat as well as fiber. So you want to fit a breed, you want to choose something that's going to really fit with your plans and what you want to do with your property, what fits with your ideals, what's going to work for you. Any livestock that's been sold as organic meat must have been organic since birth. The ewe or the doe has to have been maintained under organic conditions for the last trimester of her pregnancy. Older transitioned animals can be certified for wool or as breeding stock. So if you're buying in somebody else's animals, if you're going for certification or if you're marketing yourself as organic, this is the only time this really matters. You want to make sure that that ewe or doe has been maintained under organic conditions through her last trimester, and then the lambs would be considered organic. You can't sell anything that you've brought into the farm that isn't organic as meat. You can use them for wool, and you can also transition them for dairy. In the case of goats, if you're milking, the dairy animals can transition. Breeding stock. Again, transitioned livestock can never be sold as organic meat, but breeding stock has to be kept organically during the last trimester of pregnancy for the progeny to be certified as organic meat. Dairy stock has a 12-month transition period, and if you're transitioning your farm to organic production, that last 12 months can coincide with the 3rd year of transition on your farm. Usually it takes 3 years to transition a farm into organic certification. So if you're bringing in dairy cows or dairy goats or anything else along those lines, that last year can help them transition as well. And so that the milk or cheese that you might be producing from those animals could be certified organic. If they've gone to a non-organic, this last note, if they've gone to a non-organic operation and come back onto your property, they can't be sold or labeled as organic unless they transition again. Feeding, if you're feeding, again, your pasture must also be certified organic, or if you're under the 5,000 rules, it's been maintained organically. Your animals have to have a minimum of 120 days of outside on pasture during the season grazing. Inclement weather is defined as something that could be potentially physically harmful, but just because you might be lowering your production yields, that's not considered physical harm. There's lots of, I think when some of these rules came out, there were a whole lot of people trying to label their things as organic and still skirting the rules and doing things in a very traditional confinement operation type setup. And so they had to be real specific when they started defining these rules as to what that means. So you can't say that, well, she doesn't produce as much milk when she gets out on pasture, so I have to keep her locked up. That doesn't count. So inclement weather is, again, defined as something that might cause physical harm. Animals need to be out at least 120 days minimum. At least 30% of their dry matter food source needs to come from grazing during the grazing season. And finish time can't exceed 1/5 of the animal's total life, or 120 days, whichever is shorter. So again, you can't have them, well, they were raised on pasture for the first 2 months, but we've had them in, confinement for 1.5 years on grain. That doesn't work. Grain and dietary supplements must also be certified organic, although there's some synthetic supplements that are allowed. And again, that goes back to that NOP document that has all the authorized products that you can use. Prohibited substances, they actually had to put in this whole thing that you couldn't feed plastic pellets, which is a little frightening to me that somebody was actually feeding plastic pellets, but apparently they were, so they had to put that in there. You can't refeed manure. You can't feed formulas containing urea, poultry byproducts, hormone or growth regulators, etc., cannot be used under organic processes. And you need to document your feeding process. And again, I want to keep repeating, all of these rules go back to if you're marketing your product as organic. If you're just trying to follow organic practices for your own purposes, then you don't need to be tracking all of this, although documenting your feeding process is a good idea. And avoiding plastic pellets is a good idea. Your facilities need to provide for year-round access for all the animals to the outdoors: shade, shelter, exercise areas, fresh water, the things that make sense. It has to be suitable to the species, the stage of life, the climate, etc. Lactation, again, is another one of the things I had to point out. Lactation is not a stage of life that allows confinement. You can't lock up your cow or your goat just because you're milking her. You can bring her in to milk, but you can't lock her up for the whole period. Buildings should be safe and comfortable and adequate. My sheep are spend their winters in a 3-sided shed, and they love it. They have access to fresh water. I've got waterers out there, and they can get out of the wet. They'll sit outside in a snowstorm of their own choice. They'll come out there in the morning and they'll have 6 inches of snow on their backs. That doesn't bother them in the least. But if it's windy or if it's wet, they like to go tuck into the shed, and it's south facing and it's perfectly comfortable for them. The pregnant girls, when they're closer to lambing, they come up a little closer to the barn, but they still have access to get out and about every day. Bedding, if it's roughage used for bedding, it must be certified organic. It basically means if they're going to eat it, it needs to be organic. If you're going to, again, be marketing your product as organic. So if you're buying in straw or other things where they might actually eat it, it should be organic. Fencing, wire, electric, or wood is allowed. Treated fencing is not allowed, but is often grandfathered. And that's going to be based on your inspector coming in. So if you've got pressure treated posts on your fencing, and usually they prefer to have your wire running on the inside of it, so the animals are not directly exposed to the posts, but they will allow that for grandfathering. They generally won't allow it for new fencing coming in. Again, a barn versus a shed depends on your situation. Ventilation is critical. You don't want respiratory diseases because you've got them locked up in a barn and no ventilation. Shade is important. I know there's plenty of producers that have their animals out in fields that don't provide any shade, and they all seem to be doing just fine. I know that my sheep, when it's hot, go under the trees someplace. So when they're rotating around in the fields and the pastures, they go for the shade in the heat of the day, and then they're up in the mornings and they're up in the evenings eating as much as they can. So it works really well for them, and I find that they really seek it out during the heat of the day. So that to me tells me that happy sheep put on more weight, happy goats produce more milk. Stress causes gaps in weight gain, it causes gaps in milk production, it causes gaps in fiber production. So again, the less stress your animals are going through, the better product they're going to be producing, whatever that is that you're looking for. Flies, same thing. Flies are not just a nuisance, they cost you money. Animals that are fighting with flies all the time are not eating, they're not gaining weight, they're not producing milk, they're not doing what they need to be doing. There's a lot of options. Particular contraption is an Epps trap, and somebody spent a whole lot of time researching the patterns that flies take prior to landing on something and biting it. And this has a plexiglass panel in here somewhere. It's hard to see on this picture, but the flies basically circle this big black animal a few times, and then they go in for a bite and they hit the plexiglass and they bounce into a tub of soapy water. Supposedly they work really well. I have not tried one, but my understanding from what I've heard from other people is that they're highly effective. You can also use sticky traps, scent traps, anything that's going to help reduce the nuisance flies and the biting flies. Handling pens, portable fence panels are awesome. You can pick them up and move them if you want. Same thing with gates. You can get different styles and designs. You don't have to go overboard. We've used cattle panels and hauled them around, and they make good, again, portable fence panels as well. So there's lots of options there. Fencing, woven wire, you need to make sure you're getting the right size for the animals that you have. What will hold a sheep might be dangerous for a horse. It might also be dangerous for a goat. If your goats have horns, you need to be looking at different sized woven wire. So that's something that you want to have a nice conversation with your fencing people on. Premier Fencing is an awesome company. They have a lot of really good quality product, and they've got very good people available to talk fencing. I use Wells Croft up here. Dave Kennard and his team are fantastic. They use a lot of Premier product as well. Again, tremendous source of information to talk to and figure out what it is you're trying to do, and they'll help you figure out what it is you need to get it done. Electric strand versus electro net. You can get electric netting for pretty much any animals, and that's great. Pick it up, move it. It's perfect for rotating pasture. Electric strand permanent fencing wire is great for your perimeters. Your chargers can be battery, plug-in, solar, depends again on your situation. I have a bunch that just run off of marine batteries that sit out until they run out of juice, and then I go swap them out for another one and recharge them. So those work really well. Portable fencing is awesome when you've got goats or sheep or any kind of small ruminants, because it makes it so easy to rotate your pastures. You just move them from section to section to section, pull the fence and set it back in. Those fences are supposed to last, give or take, about 5 years. I've had some that have been, hanging out there for about 15 until they finally fall apart to the point where you can't put them back in anymore. Operations. So you should have a pasture plan. You should have a manure plan. Even if you're not trying to certify or sell product under the organic label, these are all good things to do when you've got livestock. Figure out what your plans are, where you're going to rotate your animals, what are you going to do with all the manure. Now, sheep and goats are easy. They don't tend to pile up, although in the winters, if you've got them in smaller areas closer to the house, closer to the barn, etc., because everything's covered with snow. You got to figure out what you're going to do with all the stuff coming out of the sheds. You want to know where your food's coming from. You want to track the amount and the sources of your feed, including your supplements. And again, if you're not marketing for organic, you just want to try to make sure you know where all of that stuff is coming from in the first place. So amounts and sources and movement. If you are part of the Scrapie program, so Scrapie, for those of you that don't know, is the small ruminant version of mad cow, except that it hasn't ever been proven to get into the human through the food chain. It doesn't, you know, eating Scrapie infected sheep has never caused any kind of problem in people. But that said, there is still a testing program that's countrywide, and you need to, if you want to voluntarily join that, then you have specific tags that you have for ears, and you have to track your animals and make sure that you keep a record of stock being transitioned in or out, new lambs, deaths, shipments, sales, etc. Medications that are prohibited under organic practices are any subtherapeutic use of antibiotics. So that means medicated feeds. You'll see a lot of grain products that have antibiotics in them already, whether it's for chickens or goats or sheep. Those are prohibited. Any medications other than vaccinations, unless your animal is sick, basically. So any pre-illness preventative kind of use of antibiotics or medications is prohibited. Synthetic internal parasitides on a regular basis. So if you're just worming because somebody told you to worm every 2 months, that's also prohibited. Vaccinations are allowed. Therapeutic use of antibiotics or meds as prescribed by a vet are allowed. Dewormers can be used for breeding or dairy stock. Once treated with any prohibited substances, the meat can't be certified as organic. Ivermectin, and I'm not sure if this has been updated since then, but right now ivermectin is the only one I'm aware of that is authorized as a chemical parasite. Herbs as a medical treatment don't need to be certified organic, but as a feed supplement, they should be. So if you're feeding herbs on a regular basis with every feeding, then that should be certified organic. If you're using herbs to treat something specifically, then it doesn't need to be certified organic. Homeopathy is allowed. I use a lot of that. I have an appendix that I can provide as well for anybody that's interested, but there's a lot of different homeopathic remedies that work really well on animals, and they work really fast, which is pretty surprising, but I've used them to treat mastitis. I've used them for weak lambs, lamb rejection. There's all kinds of things, shock, injury. There's all kinds of stuff that you can use these for, and they are allowed under organic practices. They're also pretty inexpensive and pretty effective. Worms. Worms are going to be your biggest problem with any small ruminant, besides perhaps your neighbor's dog or local coyote pack. Worms are the first thing that will take your animals out. You're looking at reduced weight gain, reduced milk production, reduced resistance to secondary diseases. Sheep distribute larvae really well. They poop all over the place in small pellets that break down easily, and the larvae that are expended in that process then are in the grass, and they or the eggs that are in the grass then hatch into the larvae, and the larvae come back up and the sheep eat them again. Sheep graze all the way down to the ground. So they are usually pretty good at picking those larvae back up. And they take a little while to acquire any kind of resistance. And the ewes, because of the stress of lambing, are also generally reduced resistance post-lambing in your goats. They've found resistance in a lot of worms to most classes of synthetic anthelmintics. The biggest offender up here is going to be your Haemachus contortus, which is your barber pole worm. It attaches into the true stomach or the abomason. It can produce 5 to 10,000 eggs a day. It goes hyperbiotic in the winter, which means that it basically just encapsulates and hides out and is immune to the wormers in this case. In some cases, the eggs are overwintering, and it's seen to have resistance to all classes of chemical anthelmetics. Not across the board everywhere, but in various places it has shown up with this resistance. The symptoms are anemia, so you'll see paleness in the membranes around the eyes, bottle jaw, which is an edema and a swelling underneath the jaw. This is a worm that doesn't usually cause diarrhea or scours. It goes for the blood system. It doesn't cause a lot of digestive tract issues. And it is present both in goats and sheep. Since you can't do routine worming, and these are your 3 classes of wormers, so the benzimidazole, imidazothiolase, and ivermectins. And there's a lot of different commercial names under each of these categories. So Panicure and Safeguard and Valvason, those are all the same chemical. Strongid and Rheumatel, those are the same chemical. Dectamax, etc., ivermectin, they're all the same chemical. So ivermectin, if it's where'd I go? Ivermectin, if the vet says to try it, you can use it prior to the 3rd trimester of gestation, but not during lactation if you're going to market the meat as organically produced. Dairy stock at a minimum 90 days prior to milk production, and not for slaughter stock. FAMACHA, and I apologize, I forgot what that stands for specifically, but it's the process of looking for barber pole, or basically what you're looking for is anemia based on the membranes in the eyes. And the paler they are, the more at risk they are. So what you're hoping for is something that's a really bright pinkish red, very healthy, and if they get down into here, you're in trouble. And anywhere in here is fine. You might want to think about trying to come up with some kind of worming towards the bottom. Fecal samples are another option. You can look at your own, you can send them out. You can get it's not that hard to go through. It just takes some time to do your own fecal samples. But if you get a microscope, it's not that tough. You only want to worm the individuals who need to be wormed. Refugia are the worms that have not been exposed to treatment, and it reduces the risk of disease, a risk of resistance. Risk of resistance. So if you've got a lot of worms that have survived multiple doses of ivermectin for your whole flock, then what you end up with is a bunch of worms that are resistant to ivermectin. If you've got a bunch of worms who are reproducing that have not been exposed to ivermectin, then the chances are ivermectin will still work to kill them, at least a large percentage of them. So again, you don't want to worm your whole flock. You only want to worm the individuals who need to be wormed. You can select for breed resistance. In some cases, there actually are some breeds that have been known to be resistant to worms. You can get resistant individuals, and resistance is good. That means somebody that doesn't seem to ever produce much of a worm load. So if you do fecal samples on that particular animal, you're never going to see too many. Versus resilience. Resilience is one that is going to show a very high worm load and not have any physical problems. So that means that that ewe or doe is out there spreading worms everywhere for everyone else, and they're not bothering her, but that doesn't mean they won't kill something else. So resistance is good, resilience may or may not be good. Nutrition and keeping a high plane of nutrition, whether that's on grass or whether you're supplementing with grain periodically or regularly, the better condition your animals are in, the better resistance they're going to have to worms. If they're hungry, if they're eating really rough forage and they're not getting any kind of supplement, then their resistance is going to go down. Tannin-rich forages are known to also reduce worm loads. So browsing, and goats are great at browsing, is higher in tannins mostly than general grasses and pasture grasses. Sericea lespedeza is hard to grow up here, but you can actually order this. You can order it in a pelleted form. They grow it down south. I tried that, and my sheep wouldn't eat it. Even if it was mixed in with the other grain, I would go back out and they would have picked every pellet of the other stuff out, and there'd be half a bucket full of this stuff that they would not touch. So it must taste pretty bad. We did overseed with bird's foot trefoil, and that seems to have taken in our fields pretty well. Plantain and chicory. Chicory is not particularly high in tannins, but it works. That was according to an article from Deb Perkins. These are pretty natural in a lot of New Hampshire pastures or in the Northeast pastures. Wormwood you want to be careful with. Wormwood is a problem for pregnant animals because it can cause contractions. But if it's just growing wild in your fields, then it tends to be helpful as far as keeping the worms down. Herbs for worming as well. Black walnut, again, not for pregnant animals, and it's toxic to horses, but it's known as a good natural anthelmintic. Garlic, I use all the time. I buy big jugs, gallon jugs of garlic juice, 100% pure pressed garlic juice. It smells like a really bad Italian restaurant when I'm doing that, but it works. And some of the sheep really like it, some of them not so much. But it does a number on, thank you, it does a number on reducing the worm loads. Some people have said that it might cause the lambs or kids to stop nursing. I haven't seen that problem. I'm not milking my sheep for cheese, so if you're milking your goats, that might be a problem, although you could probably start marketing pre-garlicked goat cheese. Pumpkin seeds are a natural anthelmintic. If you can pick up pumpkins from a local grower at the end of the season, maybe stuff that didn't sell, throw those out to your sheep or goats. They love those, absolutely love those. And the seeds are natural anthelmintic, especially going into fall. Coconut, carrots. There's been a lot of research on copper wire particles. Sheep have a low level of copper toxicity. They have a much lower need for copper than goats do. And that is one of the areas where there's a substantial difference in grains, et cetera. So if you're, something to think about as well if you're having goats or you're having goats and sheep. But that said, they've been looking at doing some research on these copper wire boluses, and supposedly they work really well. I don't know what it interferes with, some kind of electrical currents with the worms, but it messes them up. So that's kind of interesting research. Homeopathy, there are a lot of homeopathic products as well that are supposed to be really good for worming. Pasture rotation, less than 3 weeks in any given area. The life cycle of the worms changes depending on the weather. So when things are really hot and humid, they could be hatching in less than 3 weeks, in anywhere from, well, 3 to 4 weeks. So basically what you're looking at, trying to keep them on any particular pasture area for less than 3 weeks. Try not to overgraze. During high growth periods, try to keep them moving. Again, you really, most of the larvae ends up in the first couple of inches of grass. So if you can keep your sheep moving through pretty quickly, various areas, put them on smaller rotations for a week, maybe 2 at tops, and then move them on to the next one, it'll go miles for helping you try to reduce your worm loads. Resting the area for at least 60 days, or better yet, if you can rotate with a different species. Most worms are species specific, so what's going into your sheep doesn't survive a horse gut or a cow. What's going into your horses doesn't survive with the sheep. Sheep and goats, however, are not, you can't rotate between sheep and goats. Sheep and goats hit the same parasites. So, but if you've got horses and you can have your horses follow up after your goats or your sheep, that's a great way to reduce the worm loads on your fields. We've been in a drought lately, so just having things kind of chewed down and really dries out the larvae and will kill a bunch of them. So hopefully just the weather itself has helped clean out some of our fields. Field crop rotation, so if you graze the first round and then you cut hay the second round, that's fine as well. Or tilling things up will get rid of a lot of your worm load. But basically what you don't want to do is graze an area and then give it a couple of weeks to grow back and then throw your animals right back out on it, because all that's going to do is have all those larvae crawling up into that nice fresh new grass, and your sheep and goats are going to chow down. Timing's tricky. Ideally, you're looking at dew here. Larvae crawl up in the moist grass, and that just makes them easier to pick up during grazing. But most people put their animals out, and they don't wait until 10 o'clock in the morning and check that the dew has lifted. They're either out in a certain area and they're grazing that until they're done, and then they move to another area. So it's easier to control. For the most part, it's generally easier to control rotating your pasture than timing of when your animals go out. But again, it just depends on your management practices, how many animals you have. Maybe this could work for you. Manure control. Sheep naturally spread their manure. They kind of are out there with little pellets all over the place. But there's been some research. It used to be standard practice to go drag your fields as soon as your animals were off of a field and spread the manure around. The downside to that is it's kind of also spreading the eggs around all over the place. So if you've got the right conditions, all you've done is you've spread your worm load everywhere. I actually did some research and found out that that larvae can travel maybe as far as 10 feet from wherever that poop pile was that they originated in. And so if you have then spread that manure all around your field, you could effectively be spreading your larvae all around your field. Again, sheep and goats tend to spread it around for you, so there's not much to be gained by dragging fields. If you are cleaning your fields or pens, or maybe you've got animals that are up close to the barn for a period of time where the manure gathers, then stockpiling that as far away from animal areas as possible is the best management. You can get fly predators, earthworms, dung beetles. These are integrated pest management. They help maintain healthy soil conditions and take out a lot of your nuisance flies and nuisance predators. Nuisance flies, actually. Fly predators are these little parasitic wasps that lay their eggs in the fly larvae. And they're pretty effective as well. And then traps again. Any questions so far? Okay, we'll keep going. So handling, and this goes for goats as well. Sheep aren't stupid, they're sheep. They have 3 primary motivators, which are basically safety, sustenance, and sex. And the priority of those varies substantially depending on what's going on around them. Sheep understand statistics. If there's one of them, they have a 100% chance of being eaten. If there's two of them, they have a 50% chance of being eaten, and so forth and so on. And they don't have to outrun the coyote, they just have to outrun one of the other sheep. As far as movement goes, gates are a problem for them. They prefer to go uphill versus downhill. I found that using airlocks is a way to contain them, which means basically you get them into one section in a smaller containment before you open the gate to get them into the next section. So you're trying to get them, contain them as they move around. Gates, if you end up, say you're moving 10 sheep and you end up with 5 of them on one side of the gate and 5 of them go the other direction, you're better off just getting all 10 of them back together and trying again, because trying to keep the 5 where they're supposed to be and get the others in with them becomes far more problematic. Basically, nobody likes to get left behind or left alone because that becomes very unsafe. Sustenance. Sheep will come to be trained very easily to come to grain. They tend to be very food motivated. I found goats to be the same way. Treats, I actually clicker trained my sheep, it works. Treats and rewards for good behavior has come in rather handy, especially handling a bunch of rams. So unless you have a really good dog, you are never going to be as good as a dog. So getting them to come to you as opposed to having to chase them all the time is going to work for you much better. It's going to work in your favor. Sex, the boys will be boys. Handling rams doesn't make them problematic, but poor handling will make them behave poorly. Some rams become a whole lot more difficult to handle when they grow up, and goats are the same way. Any male animals, as they reach sexual maturity, they can shift gears and become a whole lot more aggressive. I've had rams. This guy in particular was an absolute sweetheart. Came when I called him, stood to get his halter on. I clicker trained him to pick up his feet so I could trim those because he was too big to roll over. He was absolutely fantastic. I've had others that kind of hit the terrible 2s and turned into real quite dangerous animals. So those are more on the rare side. Again, generally really good handling gets you somebody that comes running when you call them, and not to come charging at you, but to come up to you to get petted. So, but again, that whole outlook and attitude can also change substantially when the girls are in heat. He happened to be really good no matter what, but others will get a whole lot more aggressive when they've got the girls in with them. So that's something else to keep in mind. Marketing. Marketing for your products. Farmers markets are picking up again right now, especially they've turned into a pretty good opportunity for moving product. Word of mouth, there's a lot of local farm sales, websites, everything online, obviously. Look at where we are right now. Online is going really well these days. Keeping in touch with your customers, communicating, posting things, people seem to really love that. Looking at marketing to local restaurants, co-ops, grocers. Again, if you're producing anything in volume, this might be an opportunity. CSAs, join your state NOFA if you're not already a member, and go through those websites as well. Lots of opportunities to move product from the farm, locally grown stuff is in high demand these days. And so if you're looking to do this beyond just providing food for your own family or fiber for your own knitting projects, there's a whole lot of room in the market for new producers. And then when it comes to marketing, again, you want to figure out what it is that's making you unique, what's differentiating you from your neighbor. and communicate as much as you can about how you do things. People really like to have more information. You hear the phrase, know your farmer. The more you can tell them, the more they like it, the more confidence they have in what it is they're purchasing. So, question. We blew through that rather quickly. Again, usually we're doing this in person and there's animals standing there, but in this case, we're COVIDing. So that's it on our side. Paul?
Yeah, Kim, I had a question about your garlic and
Yeah.
the concentrated garlic. Do you do a drench, or how do you administer that? And
So I use a large syringe and squirt it in their mouths. Keep their heads down so you don't make them start coughing. Again, this guy, I had to put the garlic cup up high or he would knock it down to try to drink the whole thing. Others are less excited about that whole process, but about 5 to 10 mils, 5 mils for the lambs and 10 mils for the big guys. And usually every few weeks, although I find if they don't need it, you can't overdo the garlic. So even if they're not looking wormy, I'll garlic them if I've got them all caught up to garlic. But I find that it works really, really well. And for the most part, I don't end up having to use any kind of chemical wormer. If I have somebody that's really stressed, if I've got an elderly sheep or a lamb that's just having some problems or things like that, then yes, I'll go for the ivermectin. I'm not trying to sell meat that's organic, and I'm not marketing my wool as organic right now because my processor can't do it. So for me, I'm not trying to keep with the label, so I'll do what I need to do to keep the animals healthy. But I find that the garlic works for me most of the time.
Great.
And I buy it's the 100% pure garlic juice. It's called Garlic Barrier. We get it through the NOFA mass order, but you can also do the NOFA bulk order. You can order it online. You want to get the gallon jug. It's more expensive, but the small jug, the quart jug, is only 10%. So the gallon jug is 100% pure, but it works really well.
Great.
Any other questions? So Paul, I can get you the presentation and the appendix that has state contact information, some of the homeopathic remedies, the garlic juice reference, some other readings and things that people might be interested in seeing.
Great.
And then posted someplace where people can access it, right?
Yeah, well, this recording will be available to everyone that's attended and people that haven't attended but want to view it later. I don't know about our ability to edit or add new content other than what's been presented here, but your contact information is there.
If anybody wants it, they can reach out to me. I'll send it to them.
That sounds great. Okay, well, before we close this, I will put up that QR code one more time just in case it's helpful for anybody else. But unless there are other questions, just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday evening. I have some thunder outside, so I had to move in, but it's a good evening activity to educate and learn more about what we can do to keep things organically around here. So thanks, Kim, for taking your time. And
Sure.
sharing your knowledge as usual. And thanks to those who have joined us here this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Great. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.